The story of Mount Hebra is deeply tied to the history of the kingdom, yet, for a long time, its name was lost in localization. Most knew it by the name Death Mountain, and assumed that Death Mountain only existed in the dark world of A Link to the Past. But that's not quite right either. So is it Death Mountain? Well, yes, and also no. But also yes, and still somehow also no. If you dig deep enough, you can see the moment on the internet when the broader Zelda fandom discovered that the fabled mountain had its name changed during localization in A Link to the Past. For me, the change itself seemed innocuous until later games when the full weight of losing key observations about the geography began to sink in. To really understand the importance, we need to rewind time and go back to the era of the sky. In Skyward Sword, we get to explore a very early Elden volcano. A quick look inside shows us the infamous twin conduits that have been known to Spectacle Rock at various points in its history. To connect the dots to the first appearance of Mount Hebra, we need to find a mentally answer the question about how it is that Elden volcano and Mount Hebra share a land feature. It would be easy to write this off as ever-changing geography, but there is indeed an answer to why this is the case. Simply put, the two mountains were likely part of the same range at some point, and there's decent evidence sprinkled throughout the series to prove it. To start, we need something that can tangibly demonstrate the slow separation of that mountain range. Ocarina of Time can get us somewhat there. The mountain behind the top of Zora's domain, the one that most people misidentify as the Dueling Peaks, has the same chi-split peaks, and if we take a look at the valley between them on the map, we can observe that there's still a significant amount of hills and ridges between them. If we wanted to prove that this was intentional, all we need to do is take a quick look at the map from Four Swords Adventures. The map itself is highly stylized, so I don't take it and its presentation of the terrain as canon. I take it more as a signal of their intent in the design. You can see the mountain range actually slowly splitting here, with the what would be a probable ancestor to the Tower of Hera up on the right, and then a caldera on the left. I won't spend too much time on this, because again, I don't treat the presentation of the terrain as canon, but I do think it's important. By the point of A Link to the Past, Spectacle Rock, it still exists, but we don't get to see quite the full specter of the mountain in the way that it once was. To the far right of the map, we have Zora's domain. So far so good, everything still lines up. A few hundred years later in Echoes of Wisdom, the entire mountain is covered in snow and ice, and all of a sudden, a place we know as Elden, on some maps, seems to be far to the west. How did this happen? A quick look at the terrain in A Link Between Worlds can fill in the gaps. Somewhere between A Link to the Past and Echoes of Wisdom, the mountain itself became very volcanic once more. A big clue to that shift is that we can see that the Tower of Hera is actually surrounded by lava. There were signs that Hebra was volcanic, going as far back to this 1991. I spent a lot of time exploring these mountains, and for a long time, I didn't question why there was blue speckled rock sticking out of it. That blue speckling exists in real-world mountains that are volcanic or adjacent to volcanoes. It's something that forms when a mountain has more sodium content than silica. It's known as blue sodalite. It's at this point that you may be wondering where I'm going with all of this. Well, to address the big speckling elephant in the room, this is where I'm going. Zorana and Ploymus have all the makings of this mountain, and a few more even. Let's start with the lore first. In addition to this, Sidon gives us crucial piece of information about the slow deterioration of the mountain. One of the ways that we can determine that the domain is the fabled Mount Hebra of old is by that beautiful blue rock. In addition to being left by volcanic eruptions in rocks that are rich in sodium instead of silica, it's also prone to damage when exposed to water. Its hydroxyl-friendly surface would ensure that when it absorbs water, it would also absorb other things, such as acid rain. This provides us a plausible reasoning for why the domain is disintegrating and why it may have subsided in the past. When we look at the progression of the erosion of the mountain, we can see how heavily it aligns with the Mount Hebra across the series. Echoes of Wisdom provides us with an even more nuanced look at it. The modern domain also yields several clues to its volcanic past. The overhanging cliffs surrounding the Zora seat of power are covered with a smooth blue rock. This same rock can be found inside many of the caves, along with something equally curious. In this case, we can see an ascending tower of ruins, all posted lintel from the Age of the Gods. You may have noticed that some of the columns are partially inside of the bluestone. Ask yourself what sort of things could cause that. Sodalite by nature is not soft enough in many conditions to simply absorb the columns over time. No, there's one force responsible for this, which is heat. It's very likely that the ruins in this cave once existed somewhere above this place, and an eruption liquefied the sodalite, in and on the mountain, leading to the structure sinking rapidly before settling, only to have the structure around it slowly begin to swallow it. This isn't the only case of this. A quick look at Ludo's channel reveals a crumpled set of ruins made by the same material as all the other post and lintel ruins. Curiously, there are a modern set of ruins within this mountain too. The Byroad Cave yields a treasure trove of ruins. I question how long these have been here. At the very least, I suspect the stonework was from an older time, while the other accoutrements are due to some band of thieves, or even Misco themselves using the site as a stash spot. The best estimates would suggest that the post and lintel style ruins that we find across Hyrule date to a time before history, yet here they are, inside of spaces that may well predate the Zora themselves. What can we learn from all of this? We can learn that the sodalite formation on the undersides of cliffs would suggest a blast of heat that came up from under the domain during an eruption. The forlorn abandoned mine beneath the domain bears telltale signs of the dead magma chamber. So what happened then? Well, the evidence suggests at the dawn of time, the area known as Elden Volcano used to house twin conduits. Over the years, they slowly grew apart. By the point of Ocarina of Time, the other mountain was bordering on being qualified as a caldera lake, and it may have remained as one too, if it didn't have the distinct honor of being built out of stone that is known to crack and dissolve almost when exposed to long periods of submersion in water. But how does this happen? Well, this happens through a process known as chemical leaching. In the case of this, water can slowly dissolve out the sodium and chloride ions in a lattice-like structure that is formed in this particular type of rock. This weakens the internal bonding of the mineral. Over time, the slow leaching causes microfractures in a brittle texture. It's slowly removing the glue between bricks in a certain sense. The surface may look fine, but the inside starts to crumble. Most likely, the mountains grow away from each other because of plate tectonics. Now, you might be one of those people who's considering commenting, "You're thinking too hard about this." Let me convince you otherwise. Back behind the modern-day Death Mountain, we can see a chain of developing cones. You might remember this from such hits as Hawaii. The reason this happened to Hawaii is because of the movement of tectonic plates. Each small cone represents what we will just call a mini eruption. Under the crust of the Earth, fissures can release magma from underwater volcanoes. With periodic enough activity, you can form little cones like these. It would likely point to what appears to be Hyrule moving in the southwest direction due to tectonic shifts, which will eventually create an even more pronounced set of barrier mountains in the desert, this time on the west side. This won't happen for a while though, like a really long time, like a meter worth of time, or as Nintendo of America would localize it, 100 years. The caldera lakes and closed cone collapse sites on Death Mountain paint a picture in the geomorphological sense. It tells me that tectonic activity wasn't always such that there would be some sort of a visible drift. This tells me the plates shifted all around Elden, leaving wonders of nature in its wake. It makes me think that the Elden we see today is the progenitor of many versions of itself. It makes me believe that the stability of Death Mountain chain settled long ago and left part of itself behind in another region or two. That was probably the first major move. From there, likely forming Skull Lake Volcano, then Gut Check, then in a counterclockwise spiral from the same point, forming other little volcanoes. No doubt, perhaps an even older sibling than Old Mount Hebra is New Mount Hebra. It would suggest that in the primordial violence of the formation of the world, that process yielded a supervolcano that eventually split. Then at some point near to the end of time, then to creation, it split again and again and again. Death Mountain has had a lot of breakups. One feature of volcanoes is that they can cause and experience volcanic winter. Given the lack of apparent recent activity beyond the giant hole in the peak, I suspect that it is nearly dormant. The lava flows beneath the surface are faint but still present. This leads me to wonder, did the Gorons dwell in this place? There certainly is evidence of an association to Din here. The post and lintel ruins bear the crest of Din, and these columns have an even more strange twist. It's likely, perhaps, that Elden began here in the distant past. It wouldn't be shocking for the goddess domains to shift, really. The Lomare labyrinths have their own association as a goddesses as well, and they're quite a bit different than what we've ever known them to be. So it doesn't seem out of the question. It seems that this mountain was the first half of the other half. It paints a picture of the early surface, one that was chaotic and smoking hot. As for the name, it's left a mystery. More often than not, mountains with Hebra in their name tend to be cold and wet. Many have suggested that Hebra may just well mean snowy mountain. Beyond the mystery of the name is another mystery entirely, which is how the peak of Mount Hebra got a giant hole in it. According to the lore and mythology that was around back when Breath of the Wild came out, It was thought that this was due to a test fire accident caused by a divine beast. With the recent release of Zelda Notes, Zelda makes a remark that she believes and knows in her heart that the blast that hurt Mount Hebra came from the castle. I wanted to try to validate this because I've measured it a number of times. Obsessively, even. I think I'm up to like 6 or 8 of them. Anyway, as part of this, I measured things like the slope of the trench that is in the peak of Mount Hebra in order to try to establish a firing angle. And I also did this, I recreated this shot against the peak using that information. And then I also did one from the castle anyway, just to show the differences that would be required and why that's not super plausible. In order for something to have hit the peak and created the hole that it did, which is very long and cylindrical, goes through the entire summit, you would need to have a slope, or an angle of inclination rather, that's around 2.7 degrees or so. Somewhere between 2.1 and 2.7, that gives margin of error. Then actually measuring by ticking points along the trench to build a vector like where that blast would have had to have come from, that also paints a picture. And that picture, more or less, there's very little doubt in my mind that this blast had to have come from the summit of Dueling Peaks. What's curious though is that if you take and analyze this in a slightly different way, there could be another explanation that makes Zelda right. If the shot that was fired from the castle was fired at the Dueling Peaks and hit something else that reflected it, you could get that shot. After doing a ridiculous amount of math in order to try to validate this, I more or less discovered that figuring out like the perpendicular plane that a shot from the castle would have been required to come from isn't so bad. And based on the vector of like where the trenches in Mount Hebra and where the castle is and like their elevations, because these things all factor in, it paints a picture of something that looks kind of like this. So you can see it's, again, just I made a flat plane in order to illustrate this. We don't know what it would have been if this is even right. And whatever it was though, it would have needed a backwards tilt of about 9 degrees or so for this to work. It's not out of the realm of possibility to me. Initially, I had a really strong reaction to Zelda meant about this, and once I got over acting like an angry little NPC, I started trying to think like, okay, well, how could she be right? And all the scientific explanations that are more advanced don't really work here, such as the shot that she fired. That shot was just a straight shot, obeying the complete laws of physics, it should have blown out the far side of the trench that we see. So it wouldn't even be there if it was really shot from the castle. If the shot was taken from central Hyrule, like say Hyrule Field, and she's just referring to that part of the kingdom because perhaps that was what the kingdom was at that time, since the kingdom was groaning and shrank over the ages on multiple times. You can't really get there with those ways. But it's not lost on me that the shape of the astral observatory and the chute that goes up to the throne room are shaped like cannons that we have seen in the series. You can even see one on the Stormwind Arc. The Rito cannons have that same kind of shape to them. So I would not rule this out, but I don't think that there's any way that it was a straight shot right onto the peak. So I kind of dubbed this reflective shot angle thing the grassy peaks theory, just as a joke, but anyway. So to come all the way back to the beginning, was Mount Hebra Death Mountain? It seems to me that at different points in history, the mountains have all changed names. So yes, they are, but in the present, they aren't. They are all Death Mountain, and they are not Death Mountain. They are all formed from one very, very large series of violent crustal activity buried deep beneath the earth. And over time, their purpose and their names have changed, but they remain on the landscape. I hope you enjoyed this look at the life and times of Mount Hebra and its ever-changing nature. If you enjoyed this and it felt like an avalanche of information, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. Until next time, my friends.